Yes, right? So next time you need just like a, and because it is just a gradient, you can add, oh no, I did my points in the wrong one. I can't go back. I never did back. What I was going to say was, oh, look at that. I've said 70% twice. That looks like a great opportunity to use a custom property. So there's another custom property, and we'll call it value, right? And we'll use percentage, because using percentage to fill up my pie chart, that seems sensible, right? And now you'll see that because we've tied both of those points to the same property, now we have just one exposed property to change the fill of our pie chart. And I know it kind of like, it feels simple, right? But that's kind of the point. Like, it would feel simple to whoever you provided this component to. And because it's just a gradient, and now you have a 3-segment pie chart. Isn't that cool? Like, next time you need like a simple pie chart, you don't need to find, some, huge JavaScript library that uses like SVGs and like 30 layer stacked divs and stuff, right? You just roll your own and everyone will think you're really clever. But we're not here for pie charts. We're here for a progress wheel. So let me get rid of that. And donuts are coming. Don't worry. I can't remember what my next point is. So I'm just going to press play and see what happens. Oh yeah. Can anybody remember what I didn't do with that property? I didn't make a pseudo private property. Thank you. I kind of spoiled it a little bit there, right? But so I've given it an underscore and I've set its default to 0% again, which seems like a sensible default for a progress bar to have, right? And now if I change this, you see, there you go, still works. And if I change the fifth, I'll type like 0 and delete the 0 in here. If we jump back and forth between these two values, you can see it kind of just sort of jumps, right, between the two values. And, that's not ideal, right? If we were using this in production, we'd probably only be updating the value like every few seconds, right? So it'd be nice if it interpolated between those positions. But like, that's fine. CSS has transitions. So I'll just add a transition value 1 second, right? And now let's try it. Oh no, Adam, it doesn't work. They're all going to think I'm stupid. Why isn't it working? Well, it's not working because we need our next magic trick, which is property registration. So by default, the values of custom properties are completely unitless tags, like promises of value, right? There's not even a string. It's just a completely valueless token. And so the engine doesn't know how to parse between two valueless tokens, unitless tokens. For all it knows, you could have given it like a percentage and like a date. You can't interpolate between those. So at 92% support, we now have this new at property. It's a whole at property to do this. And it's very specific syntax. You're not allowed to skip any aspect of this. So memorize it. At the top, you define your property value. The name, we're calling it you define your property name. And in this case, we're calling it value. Next, you define the syntax of that property. And here we're going to use percentage, as we mentioned, but there's a whole bunch of them. There's string, number, integer, length, and then some weird ones like color and angle, right? Because that's what CSS has conceptually as its unit types. You can control whether the property inherits down to children from where it's declared. I'm not going to touch on that, but that's pretty cool. Like, it's a cool thing to be in control of, right? And then you have initial value, which is a baked in fallback. So now that we've all seen that and we're never going to have to Google it again every single time we need it, let's paste it in to our CSS. And we'll also see that because the fallback is baked right in, we don't actually need this fallback here anymore. So I'll get rid of that as well. But now when I increment this, oh, you can see it happening. Look at that. Now it transitions, right? Clap. Because now the now the engine knows that this is a percentage, and it knows that if I provide it any other percentage value, it can interpolate between them. So yeah, so now we have a functional progress wheel. We've preserved inheritance, and it animates, and we have this lovely high-level interaction API to change the value. What else could we do? But I don't know if you remember earlier, I was looking at the donut thing, wasn't I, rather than like a filled thing. I prefer how the donuts look. I think it looks better than a filled pie chart. So maybe I will define a mask. I'll add a mask, and we'll use that gradient trick we learned earlier with a radial gradient to make a hard edge. There we go. So now we've made a perfect circle in the middle, right, to like punch out a hole in the pie chart. And doesn't that look cool? I think it looks really cool. Now when you fill it up, look at that. Doesn't that just look like a progress bar, right? But, it looks sexier. Am I wrong? No. But some people have bad taste, right? So we should probably make it an option. You could have one option, one version that looks nice, and one version for your product manager who's apparently blind. And so normally you would wrap this mask in a modifier class, right? So you could turn the modifier class on and off. But because we've gone out of our way to fix the whole inheritance thing, we already have people interacting with our component in the HTML. And wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have some properties that you fixed via styles and some properties that you configured via declarative classes and some maybe you did with attributes, right? Wouldn't it be nice if it was all sort of handled in the same way? Yes, it would, Adam, yeah. And that brings me into our next, I think this is our final magic trick of the night, and this is container queries. And this is at 74%, this is sort of starting to push what is viable in production, right? We don't have Firefox support yet, unfortunately. I recommend, because container queries have notoriously been a contentious topic ever since responsive design has ever been a thing. I recommend this talk from Miriam Suzanne because since basically forever, we were told that they were technically impossible. And obviously they fucking aren't because they work now, right? And that in itself is a really interesting story. But the nice thing about container queries compared to media queries, for anyone who hasn't seen them before, is that they can query the width of the size of anything, not just the browser viewport, right? And that opens a whole slew of opportunities that were really exciting, I swear, but we're not going to talk about today. But did you know that even more recently, container queries can query the values of custom properties? How cool is that?
Very cool, Adam.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you, Christmas Elf. Okay, so let's go back to our code. And so instead of, oh yes, I almost forgot. One important point to note is that container queries can't style the element they're querying, right? They can only style children, because otherwise you could sort of end up with an infinite loop thing, right? Where you queried the style of a thing and then you change the style of it and then it doesn't match anymore. So then you have to query it again. So yeah, so if we're going to demo this really cool feature, we have to make a couple of different tweaks. So we'll start by defining a wrapper around our progress wheel. And that will be the element that we query in order to style the progress wheel inside. And then we'll move the style attribute up. So this is going to be the thing that we target now with our API, not the one inside. And then we can wrap our mask in a container query. And we'll define this new declarative property called donut, right? And if donut equals true, I'm going to hit play one last time. If donut equals true, look at that. Isn't that cool? So we're like, some people have referred to this as like the mix-ins of native CSS, right? And it is and it isn't. You know, there's like the inheritance issue that I mentioned before, but the point is we're enabling and disabling whole chunks of CSS by querying what is essentially a string, right? We can, you know, I've made it a Boolean. It's not really a Boolean, but it feels like a Boolean. Like if I tinker with this, right? See, it only works if it is exactly true. And some other nice aspects of the container query is that you can use logical operators exactly the same as, you know, you would expect to in any other language. So if I wanted to, remember I said I prefer the donut shape, right? I want the donut to be the default. And then you have to turn it off if you don't want it, right? So I'll just put not there, and I'll change this to false. And then unless somebody specifically comes in and says donut false, there you go. That's the only way to like disable that block of styles. And you can chain them. You can use like comma separators, and you can use brackets and stuff to do ands and ifs and ors and stuff, all in that one declaration. So maybe you had like a whole sort of library of properties that all sort of combine in different ways to make the different variants of your component, whatever that is. And that's it. I've run out. So in conclusion, we've used native CSS nesting, deep custom properties, pseudo private variables, cool gradients, property registration, and container queries, all to create a high level styling API with no JavaScript required. And that's it. Any questions?
Does it make your page run more quickly?
I think, yeah, it doesn't require compilation time. So that's one benefit, right? You don't have to, every time you change a nested element or a variable or something, you don't have to flatten it out, which is what SAS did. I think there is computational overhead from using custom properties, but I think it's also reasonable to say that at this point, CSS is not what's draining your processing power, right? Like you'd have to really go out of your way to generate sort of like a noticeable rendering delay by CSS alone. So I think it's pretty safe. Yeah. It's a good question though.
I think my question would probably reduce that kind of delay. With container queries, you said you can do ands and ors and such. Does that finally make it Turing complete? Could you make a state machine or something?
Yeah, I bet you could, yeah. I think like arguably CSS has been Turing complete, I think, for a while since it had calc. There was like various sort of like hacky workarounds and stuff. As long as you consider HTML to be part of CSS. But yeah.
So you mentioned mix-ins. Is there anything from SAS or less that you wish was in CSS right now?
I have an example I could probably show you in here. See this big blob conspicuously in my sidebar there, right? This is me adding a progressive delay to a list of children. There's no way to do this in a nice way in CSS, unfortunately, even using the custom properties we have. So loops would be really lovely, yeah.
You mentioned with containers can't style the thing, its own thing. Can you still get yourself into an infinite loop where the container changes the width of its child, which then increases the width of the container, which then
Yeah,
you can still get yourself.
you can, and I'd recommend, because I can share my slides if anybody's interested after this. She touches on that in Miriam's presentation, and I think honestly the answer is kind of above, like over my head, but the answer she gives is just they just don't. We identify when a loop is being inducted, and then we just don't humor the loop anymore. I think she was able to show that in fact, those kinds of loops had already existed in float, right? So when you float an element, it will restructure the page. But then as the page restructures, you might recreate an available space for that float to go back in, and it just doesn't. That's been handled by the engine since forever. So, yeah.
Is this witchcraft? Like, can we burn you? I've got so many ideas for this at work. I didn't realise.
It's fun. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, yeah.
If container queries could affect, like, I'm going to call it the parent element, like the task element, would there be any interesting use cases for that? Because obviously, that question there about, you can still get into an infinite loop, and the answer is just don't.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, that's very similar to a lot of languages. Like, you get yourselves into infinite loops, and the advice is just like, does it actually negatively impact the fact that it doesn't allow you to start the past out?
I would say the thing that I run into the most is having to use redundant containers like that, right? Because an awful lot of CSS has worked towards not needing to do bullshit like this anymore, and container queries have kind of reintroduced that, unfortunately. Yeah.
It does feel like trying to keep people a bit too safe, like stopping them just doing stupid stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that was, if you go back to some really old like Firefox threads, that's one of the arguments against implementing has, which I didn't have time to go over today, right? But people were saying, well, yeah, we could, but then people would start to use it and they'd have like horrible performance impacts, right? But it turns out there's ways to deal with those impacts, and it's more beneficial to just sort of provide people with the tools that they need. Yeah.
What a way around the whole wrapper thing. Just use before and after. Does that work, or
Yeah,
does container not affect a pseudo?
What I have here is an example of this is because the component I just showed you guys, right? It's not very accessible. It's just two divs, right? There's no sort of ARIA markup in there and stuff. Obviously, I just did it for the demo. But HTML does already have a progress element. And so this is, again, for anybody who's interested, this is like a heavily commented implementation of this component on a native progress element. And I've used, you can't put pseudo elements on a progress in Firefox. Fucking Firefox. So what I did is I used trig to position the background images. You can see I've got like rounded ends on this progress bar, right? These are not pseudo elements, but they are background images, little circles, and they're positioned around the radius of the circle. Yeah, it's a good idea though. Yeah, pseudo elements is a great way to get around containers. Container queries do cascade down to pseudo elements. Yeah, so you can query an element and style its pseudo elements. That does work. Yeah.
Right, thanks ever so much. That was incredible. Yeah, so many things. Okay, I think we'll have a 15-minute break now. Get yourselves a drink. Mince pies are there as well. Eat those. Pizza, whatever you want. And we'll come back in 15 minutes and we'll start our